In this next section, we're going to take a look at how to use Sequencer. Sequencer is a cutscene tool in the Unreal Engine. However, since we're able to change the gameplay elements and the layout of our level in these cutscenes, Sequencer is also going to be a valuable tool for creating gameplay elements and different events like we've looked at so far. So to learn how to use Sequencer and to make sure that we can do it well, I'm going to make sure that we have some additional asset packs downloaded. So I'm going to go to the free section of the marketplace again. We're going to go to Epic Games Content. And then here under the Epic Games Content, we're going to look for the Paragon assets. Paragon was a game that Epic had created, and so they released these assets for free. I'm going to go ahead and use the orcs, so make sure that you own Narbash if you want to play along and do the exact same things that I'm doing. However, any of these characters from Paragon are available for you to download and use inside of Sequencer as you're starting to learn. All right, so now that we're here in the engine, we're going to be able to get started on kind of working with Sequencer and getting it to work. So in order to get our objects to work inside of Sequencer, we're going to need to create what is known as a level sequence. A level sequence is just a way of storing all of the changes that are going to happen to objects as that sequence plays. We're going to create what's known as a master sequence to start with. A master sequence is actually going to contain sequences within it. So if we think of a sequence as containing the information about how something is going to change in position, or which animations it's going to play, or which sound files are going to run at given times, a master sequence is going to allow us to have a collection of sequences so that we could tell it which sequence is going to play at a given time. To create our master sequence, I'm going to come up to the little sequence menu at the top, and we're going to add a master sequence. So adding the master sequence is going to ask us for some information. It's going to need a name, so I'm going to call this first cutscene so that I know what this sequence is. The suffix master is going to come at the end because this is the master cutscene that the other cutscenes are going to be inside of. For number of shots, we're going to start simple, and I'm just going to do 2 shots. I'm not going to need some additional information that we're going to add for these other elements, so I'm going to leave them at the default. However, some of the things that we're going to see is that when we go to create shots, we can put them in a directory. In this case, the directory is called shots. Each of our shots that we create, we can give them different names. Those names are going to start with the word shot. They're going to have a number associated with them. I'm going to say that my first shot number is going to start at 10. This way, if I decide to add new things to the beginning, if I say, oh, you know, this would be much better if I started with an establishing shot where the camera kind of flew in across the level and showed me where I was, I could put that in, say, as shot number 5. And then if I needed another one before that, I could put it in, say, as shot number 3. And this way we can kind of put them in order, but still have room to put them in between. With that same idea in mind, we're going to increment by 10. So my first shot is actually going to be 10, my second 20, next one 30. That way we can add additional shots as we need them. But in order to sort them alphabetically, we're going to need leading zeros. So this is that number of digits that's going to say how many zeros can come in our shot name, so that my first shot will actually be 0010, so that it has 4 digits. Later, as we get more advanced, we'll start looking at subsequences and takes, but that's beyond this class. That's something you would learn in a class specifically about cutscenes and cutscene development. For now, I'm going to leave these at the default settings, and I'm just going to create this master sequence. Now we'll see that our master sequence is actually an object inside of our game world. It's a type level sequence, and it's going to hold information about other sequences that are going to be in the level. So if I look down in this window that's opened up, that's now my sequencer tab, I can see that there are 2 shots. I can select them individually here. Here is shot 1. Here is shot 2. These 2 shots are set up on a track that lists the shots, so that if I wanted to, I could actually move them and put them in a different order. We're going to see in a little bit that we're actually going to be able to take these shots and make them so that they're going to be able to be blended. And if they're able to be blended, we can actually overlap them a little so that they blend from one shot into the next. In the meantime, I'm just going to make sure that my shot 10, which is my first shot, comes first, and shot 20 comes next. Now, while I'm looking at the screen, I'm going to want to be able to see what my cutscene looks like. I can come up to my window here. I can choose this menu option. We can go ahead and go down to layouts, and I can change my camera to 2 layouts in my viewport. So what this does is this gives me 2 different views that I can look from. Right now, one of them is my top view, and one of them is the perspective view that we're used to. I'm going to change from my top view to look at perspective view. And this next one that's perspective, I'm going to make sure that this is a cinematic viewport. So as a cinematic viewport, what that gives me is all of these options down at the bottom that I can use to return to the front of my cinematic. I can jump to the end of my cinematic. I can move one keyframe at a time, or I can play my cinematic. So right now my cinematic doesn't do anything, but I could click play and we'll see that read head play as it moves across so that we can see our cinematic in action. So being a cinematic viewport is going to give us these elements that are going to make it easier for us to interact with items. As a cinematic viewport, we can also come up to this dropdown and we could choose if we wanted to see a nice 3x3 grid. So we can use the cinematic rule of thirds to try and center things in the middle or put them in these different areas. It's very useful as you get deeper into the theory of creating cutscenes and creating cinematic visions and how they look. If I ever need to expand one of these to full screen, I could always click the little maximize button and it'll maximize it out, and then we'll return back. There's one on the other window as well. So I'm going to go ahead and start in maximized on my edit window, the one that I'm going to make my changes in, so that I'm going to be able to move around and look through the world and build just like I did normally in Unreal. And then when I need to, I can click on this to go back to my cinematic view and check out what it looks like in the cinematic camera. All right, with this in mind, we're going to go in and start editing our first shot. If we're going to edit our first shot, the thing we need to think about is what elements in our cutscene are already going to be part of the level. So which ones are part of the level before and after the cutscene is over? So for example, if I wanted to have a rock, so I'm going to go to my content browser, right? And while I'm here, I can search for rock. And there's a nice little SM rock that came in with my standard content. If I were to have that rock inside of my level, if I wanted that rock to be there before and after my cutscene, I'm going to need to bring that rock into my scene before I start working on editing my cutscene. Other items we might want to have appear when the cutscene starts. So I might want to have one of the characters that I downloaded enter the scene when the cutscene starts running, and then they exit the scene when the cutscene's over, so that they're not inside of my game world anymore. They're just in the cutscene itself. If they're going to enter through the cutscene, we're going to be able to make them what's called a spawnable actor. A spawnable actor is spawned by that cutscene, by that sequence, and then removed when that sequence is over. A possessable actor is the term for something that is already in the world when we get started, and then we use it in our cutscene. So I'm going to treat this rock as a possessable, and then I'm going to go ahead and add some actors that are going to be spawnable as we go. So I'm going to add one of those orcs to my project. Right now, if I look through my project browser, they haven't been added yet. I downloaded them and I own them and they're on my computer, but I haven't yet added them to the project. So to add them to the project, I need to go back to my launcher. I'm going to need to go to my library, right? Here's my new project that I just created. I'm going to find my Paragon assets that are in here. And I'm going to go ahead and add Norbash to the project. Add to project. So now it's adding Norbash to the project. He should be downloaded and ready to be added. We'll notice that a lot of these files for these Paragon assets are quite large. This is going to add 2.8 gigs to my project as I add him in there. Once again, I can use the magic of editing to fast forward to when this is already done. Now that Norbash has been added to my project and I return to Unreal, I'll be able to go into my content browser and I'll be able to find the assets here. So I'm going to turn off my search. I'm going to go down to characters for Norbash. I'm going to open up heroes. There's Narbash. We can take a look at his meshes. And this will allow us to bring our fancy orc Narbash into the world. So I'm going to grab his skeletal mesh, and I'm going to bring him into the game world. Now, this step is going to take some time. If we take a look, he is currently untextured, and we'll see that Unreal is preparing those textures for us. It's going to take a little time for it to calculate all of the textures and all of the materials and everything that needs to be done to import this complex and detailed character. So I'm waiting for that to be done. As we're waiting, we can continue working. He's just not going to look the way we expect him to look. And what I'm going to need to do is I'm going to need to move him to the position I want him to be in when the project starts. So I'm going to go ahead and start with Norbash being way off over here. I'm going to rotate him so that he's rotated around, facing the direction that I want him to face. And then once he is in the position that I want, I may have to hit the End key to drop him to the ground. It looks like he is. Looks like he's floating to me, but I guess he's on the ground. Yeah, his feet are touching. Now that he's in the position that I want him to start this cutscene at, I can open up my sequencer and we can start looking at adding him to our first shot. So here's our first shot. Our first shot is going to kind of be one camera shot, one camera view that we want to do. So I'm going to double click to open that. And now here is my timeline, or here is my sequence for what's going to happen in this animation. We have our list of camera cuts. Our camera cuts shows where the camera is going to be viewing and what we're going to see with the camera. It automatically added one Cinecamera actor, one camera for us to use. This camera that it added for us to use, we'll notice has a little lightning bolt on its name. That means that this actor is spawned. It wasn't in our level before our sequence began. It wasn't in our level before our sequence began, and it'll be deleted when our sequence is over. So we don't have to worry about a bunch of extra cameras hanging around inside of our level. If I right click, I could convert it to possessable, and that's going to be an object that actually exists in the world. And then Sequencer possesses it or takes control of it when the sequence is running. And then when the sequence is over, it goes back to being in the world. We're going to do that possessable with our rock and with our Norbash. Our camera, on the other hand, is spawnable. It's going to come in when we need it, when this starts up. So to start moving this around and getting things set up, we're going to get used to using this idea of having tracks. These tracks represent the different things that we can do. As we move across, this is going to be our timeline that shows where we're going to make those changes. Right now, my timeline is set at 30 frames per second. If I wanted to, I could move this up to 60 frames per second. It'll take a lot more information, a lot more memory to store this sequence, but it'll allow us to have a lot more fidelity and detail in when we choose our keyframes. I'm going to leave mine at 30 frames per second, but that makes it very strange to look at all of my frames as 15 frames, 30 frames is 1 second, 60 frames is 2 seconds. So I'm going to show my time as seconds. If I show my time as seconds, we'll see that that changed the way that this looks, so that now I can see half a second, 1 second, 2 seconds, so I can know how long it takes for these different elements to occur. The longer you work in cinematics, the more you'll be able to really judge how long something should take. When should it be 1 second? When should it be 3 seconds? For now, don't worry about it too much because we can make changes to those as we continue to work. So if I want to set up my camera, I don't want it facing like this. What I'm going to want is I'm going to want my camera to start back off to the side, and then it's going to move in to over Norbash's shoulder as he walks up to this rock. So that's the cinematic I'm going to make. Is I'm going to take Norbash, he's going to move up to the rock, and my camera is going to start in the distance, and I'm going to move down behind him so that when he reaches the rock, I'm kind of just over his shoulder at the end. To do this, I'm going to select the camera actor that I'm updating. This is the one that is spawned at the beginning of this sequence and deleted at the end of the sequence. I'm going to pilot it. So if I go over to my actor in the outliner and I right click, I can choose the option to pilot this actor. Piloting this actor means that as I move through the world, I'm actually moving that camera actor. So that object is actually moving. If we look down in our details, you can see the position, rotation changing as I move. So I'm going to start back with kind of a distance shot. So I'm moving my beginning shot back here. And I'm going to set a keyframe that holds this position of my actor. So if I extend my camera actor here, I can find these are all of the different tracks that are currently set up for me to have keyframes. Under my camera component, the aperture is how blurry do things get when they're further away. Same as the focal length, which is like if something gets further away, it starts to get blurry. You can look up the details on how those are set. We'll mess a little bit with our manual focal distance so that we stay in focus on the things that we want to focus. Spawned is whether or not this object exists. Is it spawned at this point? I want all of those to stay at the default for now, but I'm going to change my transform. Here's where I can change my location, rotation, and scale. So what I need to do is move my camera to where I want it to be, move my playhead to where I want it to be. In this case, I want to be at the beginning of this track. So I'm going to come down to this to front. To front moves me to the beginning. And then I'm going to add a keyframe by clicking this little button in between, or by pressing enter. Enter will also add a keyframe. So I'm going to click to add this keyframe. And now it adds a keyframe for my location, rotation, and scale so that my camera actor will be at that position at this point in our timeline. I'm going to need to move my character so that I can see how he's walking before I do my movement of my camera. So I'm going to make sure that Norbash is inside of my level here. So I select Norbash. I go to track, and I'm going to add an actor from my game world, an actor from my outliner to the sequencer. So I go to actor to sequencer, and here's my entire layout. I can find Narbash, or if I have him selected like I do now, he winds up being at the top. So I'm going to add Narbash to my timeline. So now I have a Narbash timeline. Just like before, this is where he's going to start. So I'm going to go to his transform, and I'm going to set a keyframe for where he starts. I'm then going to move my read head to where I want him to reach the target. So I'm going to want him to reach the target at 4 seconds. And I'm going to move him to where I want him to be. So this is just moving him up so that he is now at the rock. And once again, I'm going to set my keyframe. So once I've moved him, so I move the read head first to where I want to have the keyframes. Then I move my actor. Then I set my keyframe. If you need to move him again, so if I wanted to actually move him a little bit to the side and rotate him a little bit, I could always set my keyframe again, and now his keyframe is set with that new information. Once I have a start keyframe and a keyframe where he ends up, as I scrub my read head, we'll see that he changes across that keyframe. So once again, I'm going to go back to my point where I want the two of them to line up. So I'm going to go to 3 second mark. And at the 3 second mark, I'm going to select my camera actor again. And once again, I'm going to go ahead and pilot it because it's easier for me that way to pilot my camera actor. Move it to where I want it to be at 3 seconds, which is going to be in like this, kind of looking over his shoulder. And I'm going to set my keyframe. So here's my Cinecamera actor. Here's my transform. Here's my setting my keyframe. And then I'm going to move all the way in so that he's almost to his endpoint. And then I'm going to move my actor because I'm still piloting it. And of course, if I want to change how quickly my camera moves, I can change this here. So this camera is now going to move slower so I can get better detail. And I'm going to add my keyframe again. So now we'll see that as time goes, there's how my camera moves. So it comes down like this. And we can see both my camera and my object moving. In my camera actor, I can see what it looks like. All right. So the next thing I'm going to also do is I'm going to change my focal point of my camera. So here I am at my starting point. So to make sure I'm at my starting point, I'm going to make sure I jump to front. I'm going to open my camera component. And we're going to change this manual focus distance. So with that in mind, I'm going to come over here to my camera, make sure my camera is selected, which sure enough it is. If I wanted to select it from here, I can also select it here, and it will select it in my level. I'm going to come down to change my values here. So here is my focus information, right? Let's see here. We're going to look at our manual focus distance. So under our focus settings, our focus method is manual. I'm going to choose my manual focus distance. I'm going to actually click on this little eyedropper, and I'm going to select an object in the scene. And that changed my value so that I focused on that object in the scene. And then I'm going to add my keyframe. Now I'm going to move to where I want my next keyframe to be. You see I accidentally grabbed my start instead of moving my read head. So I want to kind of move away, change my read head here. So there's where I'm getting closer. Here's where I get to that point. I'm going to keep moving in. And at some point around here, I'm going to start shifting my focus so that instead of my focus being on my character, I'm going to start focusing on the rock. So at this point, I'm going to go to my manual focus distance, make sure that I'm still focused on him, set my keyframe, and then as I move in to this position, I want to focus on the rock. So I'm going to set my manual focus distance, but this time I'm focusing on the rock. Adding a new keyframe. So again, remember, move your read head. So move the play head to where you want it to be. Then move your object or change your data. Then set your keyframe. Read head, object, keyframe. And so this is going to give us a cinematic that if I scroll through, I can watch as my actor for my camera runs through. I can also watch this in my other camera view. So if I take this back, I'm going to go back to my split screen. I'm now going to go up to my cinematic viewport. And then I'm going to make sure that my camera cuts here are locked to my current viewport. So my viewport will actually see what my camera is doing. So that when I press play, there's my cool shot and my focus in on the rock. Of course, right now, my guy looks a bit strange because he's just kind of like sliding in T-pose. I want him to play some animations. So our next piece is that we're going to play a couple of animations. So I can go ahead and exit again out of this mode. I'm going to go back to my 2, and then I'm going to go back to my viewport. I'm going to turn off this lock so that I'm not locked to my cutscene. I'm not kind of in cutscene mode. And I'm going to add a new track for our good friend here. So it's not part of my camera actor. It's part of Narbash. And he already seems to have it. He's got an animation track. and I'm going to click on plus animation to add an animation for him. So I'm going to look for a walk animation. I don't see one, so let me scroll through, see what I can find. I think they're going to be jog, right? There we go. Jog forward. And so we'll see now that as we scrub across this read head, oh, it placed it where the read head was. So that's a problem on my part. I'm going to need to move this back to the start so that it happens at the start. Again, I made the mistake. I forgot. Move your read head first, then place your animation. Then, you know, we don't need a keyframe for the animation because it's already going to be set up. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to extend this animation all the way to the end. So that now, as we play, let me go ahead and reconnect, lock my viewport so that I'm watching it in cinematic mode, and I press play. He's playing his jog animation as he runs up there. He gets to his point here at this cutscene, or at this keyframe. He gets to his point here at this keyframe, so I'm going to use this jump to keyframe button to get right at that keyframe. And then I don't need him to jog anymore once he reaches that point. So instead, I'm going to add another animation, right? So here's my animation set. And we're going to add another animation that's just going to be his idle when he just kind of stands there. I believe there's an idle short. Most of these characters will have one. Nope, but I can do idle relaxed, right? And then he'll go into his relaxed idle instead. All right, so he's going to play through, and he's going to play through those animations. Now, we may notice he kind of jumps between the two animations. So we're going to want to blend those animations together. In order to blend those animations, what we're going to end up doing is we're going to take his animation and we're going to put it on another track. So that he's going to have two animation tracks. So I grabbed that relaxed and I will drag that relaxed animation up to another track. And so now we'll see there are two animation tracks, one playing his jog forward, one playing his relaxed. If I hold control on my mouse wheel, I can zoom in. If I right click, I can drag over to where I'm looking at it. And now what I can do is I can actually blend these animations together. So if I get in close, I don't know if I can really get in close enough to make it easy to see. But here on my timeline, if I look at my action, if I have it highlighted, there's this little tool up in the corner. It is really hard to see and really hard to grab. You'll know that you're on it when you see this little kind of curve, or it looks like an S almost right now, that's selected. I'm going to grab that and I'm going to drag that curve out. Okay, when I'm in really close and I've got it set up, I'm going to be able to see where these two animations overlap. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add keyframes for both of them. So I'm going to move my read head to where that animation starts. And I'm going to add a keyframe for both of these animation tracks. Then I'm going to move my read head to where that animation ends, and I'm going to add a keyframe for both animation tracks. And the keyframe that I'm changing, the value that I'm changing, is going to be the weight. The way that the weight works is that if your weight is 1, it's going to play whichever animation is on top. So in this case, it's going to jump to that idle relaxed. So in this case, it's going to jump to idle relaxed. However, I can take that idle relaxed and I can say, even though it starts, it ends, and I can say even though it ends at a 1, which is fully playing that animation, I can go to this keyframe, I can select it, and I can start at a weight of 0, which means it's not playing that animation. It's going to blend between it and another animation. Meanwhile, I can go down and do the opposite down here. So while my jog will start at a 1, I can end by selecting this keyframe and set that to a 0. And so now we'll see that as it moves between the keyframes, it will blend between the two. And I could always, if I zoom out, we could change the distance between these. So if I always wanted to take these, if I want to take these and move this animation so that this is a longer blend between the two, we can increase that blend to make it smoother between the two. And so now we won't have as much of a jerkiness as he goes from one animation to the other. We'll notice at the end of my clip ends here at 5 seconds. I can actually animate and do things beyond the edge of that clip. However, they won't affect my scene because in my master scene, if I go back up a level, I'm actually going to cut to a different scene when that happens. So when that point occurs. So sometimes you want to go ahead and, build your scene out beyond the edge of the beginning and end. But note that you're going to cut inside of our master scene. So now we have our cinematic set up. So again, if I go back, take my read head to the front and I press play, I should be able to watch my cinematic take place. He's jogging forward very slowly. He stops and idles and we kind of move in and look at him. I'm going to then go back up. So let's go back to our first cutscene master. And now we're going to edit our second shot. So my second shot is going to be a camera cut, right? I'm going to cut in to another angle and we're going to take a look from a new point of view or a new perspective. So I'm going to change my cut so that I'm looking at the front of my friend here, kind of from the rock's point of view. So I'm going to go ahead and open up my second sequence. And once again, when we move to the beginning, so let me go to the front here. We're back where we were when we started our other sequence in the same way. So I have my cine camera, I have my actor, it's set in a given position where it's going to start. If I need to move that to a new position, what I'm going to need to do is I'm going to set my timeline to the start. I'm going to select my camera actor. Again, I can select it here. It's easier than finding it over here. But I have to right click over here to choose to pilot it. So I've got it selected. I'm going to have to right click and I want to pilot this actor. Uh-oh, I'm not getting my pilot option. So let's take a look here. So with my actor selected, I need to be able to pilot it. Where is it at? Oh, I currently am locked to the other. All right, so let's go back. Before I leave this cutscene and go to work on the other one, I'm going to make sure that I unlock my viewport. Otherwise, I'm going to get some strangeness where I'm not able to pilot objects around. So now I'm going to go back to my first cutscene. I'll double click to open my second shot. And here we'll see that my second shot has already been set up with my camera actor. With my camera actor selected, I'm going to work the same way as before. I can right click on it. I can choose to pilot the cine camera. And I'm going to pilot my camera in. Let me turn my speed up here. And I'm going to end up looking back at Norbash from the point of view of the rock. So I've moved my camera to where I want it to be at that point, right? And then I'm going to create my keyframe. So down my camera actor, transform, let's create the keyframe. But I've noticed one problem. Narbash has returned to his original location. Why? Because when we play our cutscenes don't always want to change the gameplay. If you had an NPC cutscene where, say, we walked into a store and the shopkeeper was behind the counter, and he was to walk out and show you a bunch of items and then go back behind the counter and the game would start up again, in that situation where that would happen, we would want the NPC shopkeeper to be back behind the counter where he's supposed to be. We don't want him to be where the cutscene caused him to end up. We would want any items he showed you to be back on the shelves. We don't want them to be on the table where they could be interacted with incorrectly. We don't want them to be moved somewhere. So not all of the changes that we make in a cutscene do we want to be permanent. But in this case, I really did want Narbash's movement to be permanent. I want it to be something that sticks around when that cutscene is over. So even though I've piloted that cinema actor and I've moved it and got it set up, I'm going to need to go back to my first cutscene to make sure that Narbash is going to retain his information. So in order to make sure that he's going to retain his information that he's going to use, we're going to need to go back to our first cutscene. We're going to need to go back to our first cutscene. And with this cutscene selected, I'm going to select Narbash. I'm going to right click on him. And with this set up, we've got an option. I'm going to select Narbash. And I'm going to go down and I'm going to right click on this transform track that is the one that we set our keyframes and made changes for. When I right click, I can go up to properties, and one of my options is when finished. And this is the decision of what should happen with this timeline when the cutscene is over. Right now it's set to project default. We could go up to our edit project settings and set it so that the default is to store or retain all of these changes. But I don't want to necessarily do that for every single object. I'm going to tell them one at a time. So the object that I want to stay is I do want Narbash to keep his new position. So when finished, I'm going to keep my state. He's going to stay the same. With that finished, right, I can go back to my cutscene master, go to my new cutscene, and we'll see, look, now he's in the new position because he stayed in that setup. It looks like my camera moved a little bit. I don't know what happened there. So I'm going to select my camera actor again. Let me go ahead and pilot it again. So I need to select my camera actor, right click, pilot. I'm going to back up a little, give me a little better view of Narbash. I want to see all of him from that point of view. I will go ahead and reset my cutscene, or I will go ahead and reset my keyframe. So I'm going to add this new keyframe to reset those values. And then now he's not going to play his idle animation anymore. So I'm going to need to add a new animation to him. To do that, I need to add him to this sequence. Right now, he exists in the world, but he doesn't exist as part of this sequence. So to add him, we're going to add a new track, actor to sequencer, and I'm going to need to find him in here. If I had him selected, he would have been available at the top, but I don't have him selected, so I'm going to have to find him. There he is right there. Now that he's added, I can change his transform. I can change his animation. I'm going to go ahead and add an animation. He's going to start by doing his idle animation. But I'm not going to do his idle animation very long because I'm going to add a new animation track. And very quickly, I'm going to get him to do his drum solo. Right now, they're on top of each other at the same time as they're running. So I'm going to zoom out. I'm going to move his drum solo down so that it starts after 1.5 seconds of looking at him stand there idle. I'm going to grab the end of my idle animation, right? And I can actually move that backwards. So grab that if I can. Wow, it's off the screen, so I may have to move this over some more. Move him back. He has a very, very long idle. That's very interesting. And I'm going to move his idle to how long I want the overlap to be. And again, we're going to do the same thing where he's going to have this overlap between the two. So as we do the overlap, we're going to blend them together. To blend them together, I go to my animation. I add an animation keyframe for my weight. First, I got to move my read head, right? So step 1, move the read head where you want it to be. Step 2, we're going to set our keyframes. Move the read head, set my keyframes. I can select these and change the values. So the drum solo animation down here is going to start at 0 and it grows to become 1. My idle animation starts at 1 and it will shrink to become 0. So now he will blend between the two and play his drum solo. Once again, as we're playing, we may want some things to happen, so I'm going to zoom out a little bit here. I'm going to let him play his drum solo for a little bit, and I'm going to move the rock as he plays his drum solo. So one thing I noticed is that this cut scene, this segment is a little short. I'm not going to have much time for his drum solo to play before the rock starts moving. So I'm going to go ahead and animate beyond my edge, and then I'm going to go back to my main track, and we will move it quite a bit. So now that we've got this set up, I've got my camera cuts, my actor, Narbash. My rock is not in my sequencer. So we're going to need to add another track, actor to sequencer. I'm going to need to find my rock in here. There is SM Rock. SM Rock is going to start his keyframe at this position. So I'm going to add my keyframe at this point. And then I will move ahead 1 second. And 1 second later, the rock will have moved. So I'm going to select my rock. Right? I will need to move my rock to a new location where the rock is going to be. And so let's just slide it this way. And add my keyframe again. So now we'll get a view of the rock moving. But we'll notice that my animation doesn't go far enough, so I need to go back to my master scene, and I'm going to need to expand my master scene to include my cool rock movement section. So let's move that over a bit. And again, I can zoom out, right click and move over so that I can make this larger. And we can move this section to where we want this to be. So now back in our first cutscene, our cutscene should go all the way to here, which is just him rocking out as it moves over. I'm going to go back into this, and just for fun, let's do a little more changes after the rock moves a bit. Right, we're going to be able to extend this all the way over. After the rock moves a bit, I'm going to change my focal point again. So select my Cine Camera actor. Here's my manual focus. Select this. I'm going to focus on him again. Add a key. We'll come back this way. When we enter, let me go ahead and go back to my first. When we enter, I'm going to want to head to focus on my buddy there. Add a keyframe. When he starts rocking, boom, boom, 2 hits. I'm going to change my focus again. Oops, I added the keyframe in the wrong spot, so let me go back. So let's go back to the beginning. So I'm going to go to the beginning. I'm going to change my focal distance to my buddy here. I'm going to add that keyframe. Then I'm going to move my read head, let him bounce twice. After he's hit twice, I'm going to change my focal depth. So I'm going to add a keyframe so that he doesn't change throughout that point, and then it will very quickly change over just a few to be my rock instead. So I click my eyedropper, I drop my rock, and I'll change my focus a little. All right, we should be able to give this a shot, see what it looks like. So I'm going to make sure I save everything. So File, I'm going to save all. I'm going to go to my first cutscene master where I've got my 2 shots, right? I'm going to start them at the beginning. I'm going to go ahead and lock it to my viewport. And I'm going to change my viewport to the neat cinematic one that looks a little more cinematic. So I have a play button up here. And here's what it's going to look like as a cinematic. Oh, it looks like I didn't set the keyframe for my rock on my first object. So it looks like I've got some errors in that setup. So one of the things I'm going to need to do is go back to my first object. Sure enough, at the very beginning, right, as I start this actor, so let me turn off my cinematic camera, go back to my normal camera. We'll turn off that lock so that now we're in normal camera mode. And sure enough, as we first start, our rock object is already over at the new moved position. And that's because our rock isn't part of our first sequence, but our second sequence is going to actually move it to that new location. And so I want to make sure that when I go to my second sequence, my rock starts where I want it to start. So we're going to need to make sure that we go to the beginning of this sequence, that while my rock is there, right, that I have my rock keyframe at that first frame. So I'm going to make sure that when we start, my rock is set as in that position so that as we start, they're going to end up being there. It looks like I need to put my rock that way in my other cutscene as well, because I seem to have moved it in the world, and when I did, it didn't get saved in this cutscene. So yeah. So let's make sure that we add a track, actor to sequencer. I'm going to find that rock. I'm going to make sure my rock is in my starting position where I wanted it to be at the beginning. So we will move it back to where we wanted it. And we will add a keyframe. So I'm going to the front, add a keyframe. I'm going to the end and adding a keyframe. So now my rock is keyframed to stay there throughout this setup. So now we can go back, give it a test again, look for any bugs. You're going to keep doing this to kind of look for changes and any errors you might have. So once again, I'm going to change to my cool cinematic viewport. I'm going to lock my tracks here so that I can see it in cinematic mode. Move back to the very beginning, press play. Here's what it looks like. I kind of zoom in on him as he goes. Now we see him stand there. He gets ready. He plays his drum solo. Our rock moves out of the way. Our camera ended because we'll watch our camera cutscene. So if I open this again, we'll see that my camera actually stops running when we get to the end, because here's my camera cuts. It doesn't make it all the way to the end. So if I want my camera cuts to keep working, I need my camera cuts to go all the way to the end. So I'm going to let that happen. Let me see where he gets his big boom there, right? So that's going to be at that point. All right, so now that we've got things kind of set up, if I press play in my game, we'll find that nothing's going to happen because we aren't set up with this cutscene to play, right? So this cutscene is created. It's ready to go. I can go back to my normal view. I can turn off my lock, so I'm not locked to that view anymore. Go to the start. I can do a save all. Make sure everything's saved. But if I play my level, we're going to find that he's just standing there. It's not doing my cutscene, right? I'm going to want my cutscene to happen at a certain part of the game. One way that I can set that up is I can select my camera. One thing I can do is I can select my cutscene. Here's my cutscene master. And I can turn on autoplay. Autoplay means that as soon as I press play, it's going to run my cutscene. Kind of interesting that my player is still in the world there. If we see if we happen to see them. All right, and it auto-played the cutscene as soon as the level started, but that's not what I want. What I want is to be able to create a trigger that's going to activate our cutscene when we step into that trigger. So in our next video, we will take a look at creating a cutscene activating trigger and adding additional elements to our cutscene.